What if one of the most important leadership skills isn't strategy, execution, or decision making? What if the real differentiator is something much simpler and much more human? And what if the well-being of your team is influenced less by the workload they're carrying and more by the way they're being led? In today's episode of The Leadership Project, I'm joined by the amazing Graeme Cowan. Graeme is one of Australia's leading voices on mental health, resilience and leadership. He's one of the founding directors of Are You OK Day, a movement that has really taken hold in Australia and beyond to help people break down the stigma about mental health. He's a sought-after speaker and researcher and the author of the new book, Great Leaders Care. His work is deeply personal. After experiencing a severe period of depression that lasted several years, Graeme dedicated his life to understanding what helps people thrive, what causes people to struggle, and what leaders can do to make a positive difference. This conversation is going to be deeply personal, where Graeme shares very openly about his own experiences so that you can learn from this and adapt as a leader who's more curious and more compassionate. Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Leadership Project. I have a special treat for you today. I'm joined by the inspirational Graeme Cowan. Graeme was one of the founding directors of Are You OK Day, and a movement that has taken on great significance in workplaces and families and circles of friends around the world around mental health. He's also the author of two books, Back from the Brink, and his new book, the one that we'll be talking about today, called Great Leaders Care, Developing Safe, Resilient and Successful Teams. That is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about, what does this mean? What does this mean to be a leader who cares? To debunk some of the myths about what it means to be a leader that cares and some of the mystique that comes around it. And sometimes it's seen as a negative thing. And how do we break through some of those to develop successful teams? It doesn't have to be a compromise between being a caring leader and having a successful team. In fact, those two things go together. So without any further ado, you don't want to hear from me. We want to hear from Graeme. Graeme, I'd love it if you would say hello to the audience. And I'd love it if you give us a little bit of your personal history and what inspires you to do the work that you do with Are You OK, with resilience and mental health, but also with this developing leaders that care.
Lovely to join you, Mick. And yeah, like many people, I have a bit of a interesting journey. I started off doing marketing. I worked with Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer in marketing roles. And then I transitioned to doing recruitment. And I was involved in recruitment for probably about 10 years. And I was then chosen by the organisation to lead up a new division, which is around culture change and creating the right cultures. And I did that, had some great experiences there, particularly with a company called Ramsay Healthcare. And we might dig into that a bit later. I then moved into executive search with the global management consulting company, Carney, and did that for about 5 years. And I was specializing in e-commerce placements. And it was a bit of a booming time. I was in the early 2000s. And then there was a tech crash. And basically, our business dried up overnight. And as a leader, I was co-leading this division. I tried to put on a happy face, put on a mask every day, pretend that things were going fine. But after a period, I really crashed and burned and had a really serious episode of depression. I had to leave work. My marriage broke down and I had to go and live with my parents. And I now often refer to that time. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Seinfeld, but my George Costanza years, living with my parents. But they really, were my lifeline, and they believed in me when I'd lost hope in myself. And I did gradually come out of it. It took about 5 years, and it was a combination of walking, reconnecting with old friends. And the real transition was writing my first book, because when you're depressed, you're really, really me focused. All you can think about is yourself and how, miserable you are. And I remember being with my mother in the kitchen in the beachside suburb of Foster. And I was saying, why me, why me, why me? And Mum hit me with one of those mother stares and said, I believe you use this experience to help other people. And I thought it was crazy at the time, but in my recovery, I thought, well, what can I do? And so I decided to write Back from the Brink, and it was sharing my story of, crashing and burning, but also sharing about another 12 stories of some everyday and some well-known people that've been through the same things. That led to being asked to speak in all sorts of places, a lot of speaking in the country areas where they didn't have mental health professionals. And then it transitioned to speaking to workplaces, and then to training managers on how to build a culture of care and a culture of high performance. And that's when I wrote this book. And I really believe that we need to redefine what great leadership is. This whole focus on results, results, results doesn't allow sustained performance. And that's what led to me writing Great Leaders Care.
Yeah, really good, Graeme. So, Back from the Brink, if I could talk about those two, when I look at it, Back from the Brink is a lot about survival and resilience and bouncing back yourself. And then I'm going to say Great Leaders Care, when I look at it, it looks more preventative and looking forward and going, well, how do we prevent burnout in the first place? It's interesting, a few things that I pick up on there, Graeme, is I want to do two, but I'll do one at a time. Your mother sharing that with you, the interesting thing there with that burnout and that trauma that you're going through, the first thing I'm going to say is that trauma doesn't discriminate. This can happen to anyone. So anyone listening to the show, you might be going through it yourself right now, or if you haven't experienced it yet, this could hit you at some point. This trauma doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone. And you can get into that cycle, Graeme, of woe is me, of why me, why me? And it's very, sorry to say it, it's very self-centered at that point. And yet there's lots of evidence out there that says that the answer to picking ourselves up and feeling like we're needed is to have meaning in our life. And that meaning comes from being in service to other people, not the why me. So I'm going to say that your mother was very wise in the words that she said, that to take this awful experience that you went through that now makes you stronger, by the way, Graeme, but then to codify that and turn around and help other people, that then instantly starts giving you purpose and helps you dust yourself off. So it's almost like a double whammy. You're gone from the woe is me, why me, to being in service of other people. And the double whammy is you're helping other people. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, it sums up very well, Mick. And that's exactly what happened. And I wouldn't say it was an overnight recovery or anything like that, but thinking about, that's the whole purpose of that book, was I really yearned for stories of people who'd been through what I was going through and came back from that. And so that was really the background to the book, sharing stories from a range of people, from, gold medal Olympic swimmers to icons of the art world and well-known poets and everyday people. And the interesting thing is that, it was launched at the Black Dog Institute in Sydney, which is a very, serious mental health facility aligned to the University of New South Wales. But I had John Brogden, who was the former opposition leader in New South Wales, launch it. And it was, he'd been through his own case of an attempted suicide, and, also came back from that. And so this was 20 years ago. And so it was very early in the era of talking more openly about mental health issues. But it just got huge coverage. That night we're on the, the SBS TV news, and in the aftermath, it was really looking at about, I did about 20 interviews on radio stations, about 3 or 4 on TV stations. And when I did book signings and also talkback radio, I found out that most of the people that came were the loved ones of someone who was struggling. And that led to my second book, which is called Back from the Brink 2, TOO. And that was a guidance for people on how to help someone overcome that depression. But, my purpose, and I really deliberately thought about what my purpose was as I evolved, and it was to help people that were struggling to bounce back and thrive. That became my purpose, and it helped to guide what I was doing. And when I was, feeling despondent or was having a bit of a tough day, I'd remind myself of that, and that made a big difference. And then my purpose has evolved, and I now say that my purpose is to help leaders to build resilient and successful teams without losing good people to burnout.
Yeah, really good, Graeme. There's a segue I need to take now listening to what you just said. And I'm going to share some stats. And I don't care if you've heard this before. We need to keep on talking about it. That 9 Australians lose their life every day to suicide. And one of the alarming things is 7 of those 9 are men. And I'm not trying to make this gender specific. There's a reason why I'm saying that. There's a trend there that, as men, we're taught that we don't talk about these things. We're taught that we should be stronger and we've got to be the strong one all the time. And therefore, there's a stigma about talking about mental health. We don't talk about it. And then when I hear about you and John Brogden standing up and sharing your lived experience and sharing those stories, that it's okay to talk about these things, that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to share your story. Because if you share your story, you might be in a room full of people that are sitting there quietly suffering, but feel like it's weak to ask for help. So tell me more about once we get this, is this the answer? This is my question. Is this the answer to finally breaking the stigma around struggle and around mental health challenges, that more of us need to share our story to normalize that it happens to everyone and we need to have these conversations?
Yeah, it's so true. And, I speak a lot now at conferences, and it's amazing what happens after I come off stage. People will come up and, oh, let me tell you about this. And I can tell you that so many people have a story. And one of the real successes of Are You OK as well was that it encouraged people to tell their stories. And there's now, thousands of stories that have been recorded on the YouTube channel of Are You OK? And it's a critical element to changing minds, to changing behaviours. If we share our story, as you said previously, it gives people permission to share their stories. And everyone has a story related to mental health, whether it's about themselves or around a loved one who's really struggling. And there still is a lot of stigma in the workplace, sadly. Are You OK has been going since 2009, has made a massive impact, but there's still considerable.
Still a stigma, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 takeaways I want to give to the audience at this point, Graeme, and I want to come back to my second point from before. The first one, everyone listening, that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of courage. That's the first thing we want to hear, want you to hear. And the second one is, the more we talk about it, the more we normalize that it's okay to talk about it, to have those dialogues and to share your lived experience. The second part I wanted to come back to, Graeme, in your introduction, I've seen this in the workplace myself, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. And it might be a good segue towards Great Leaders Care. You were in a situation in your career where you were responsible for setting culture and developing the culture of these teams, et cetera, and yet you yourself was also heading towards burnout and having your own troubles. One of the things that I see, whether it's with leaders in general or specifically with people in HR, for example, that in HR, I'm going to say it's not what they want to do. They want They want to spend time adding value and doing the strategic thinking and all this kind of stuff. But often they end up in that care and nurture of others situation, but who's there to help them? So what I'm curious is about your experience when you're in the situation where you're the one trying to set the culture in a group, but quietly you were the one that needed help, and who was there for you? Tell us more about that.
Well, I think I was a very poor man in that I didn't really share it. All the things you've highlighted before, I felt ashamed that I couldn't sort it out myself. And so a big issue was that I didn't have that support network. I didn't choose to reach out to friends. And I'd been, very work focused, very focused on, doing better, doing more, getting promoted, all that sort of thing. And often I would let go of, good practices like regular exercise and catching up with great supportive friends. And that was what I didn't do right. And so I'm now very, very disciplined about self-care, for example. I'm not sure if you want to move on to that now, but it's become a very, very important part of how I lead my life.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is going to be the good segue to the book, but just to put a pin in that kind of message there, if you're in a senior leadership role and you yourself are struggling and you're, I don't know, being stoic and going, well, but I'm the one that's I'm being the curator of the environment for others and I need to look after all of these others. If you don't look after yourself first, it's going to end badly, is the key message there, which is probably the great segue to let's talk about great leaders' care. Before we get to self-care and crew care and the things that are in the book, I want to touch on something I said in the introduction, which is the misnomer, Graeme, about a caring leader is somehow soft and, you got to drive performance and it's results. And yet what the evidence is showing us and your book is showing us is that the great leaders that do care, the success still comes. This is not a choice. This is not a choice between caring and results. It's about developing an environment that achieves sustainable results. So share your experiences here.
Yeah, and one of the things that I did, because my mindset changed over a period of time, and really saw the manager and the leader as pivotal in the workplace, the team, etc. And there's a study out of the American Psychological Association, and it shows that if a leader has a sustainable life and practices good balance between work and nurturing and restoring, 81% of their team members feel motivated. If a leader doesn't do that, only 38% are motivated. So mood is contagious. And that's why it's so important for leaders to make sure they're doing basic things to boost their mood. And another thing that I talk about very much is a moodometer. And this came from my psychiatrist. He'd asked me to rate my mood every time. And I said, well, why do you ask, why do you keep asking this? And I said, well, and he said, well, it helps me to understand where you are, from your perspective, and that's important knowledge. But I also believe you should be able to manage your mood and also maybe master it. And I was a bit put off by that and said, well, haven't I got a clinical illness? And he said, yes, you have, but I believe that everyone can learn how to manage their mood. And that set me on a quest. And it turns out that, I guess not surprisingly, he was right. And there's a Professor Sonia Lyubomirsky, who's at the University of California, and she did a book of The How of Happiness and looked at over 400 peer-reviewed studies. And she found that our mood, or what psychologists call positive affect, comes down to just three things. It comes down to our genetics, our circumstances and what's happening, and our intentional actions each day. And most people, quite surprised to find that our genetics contribute 50% towards our mood. Some people are just born more robust, more resilient than others. But the really positive thing is that 40% is then determined by our intentional actions, what we choose to do each day, and only 10% by circumstances. So that's a wonderful insight for any leader to know that, if you want to be in a positive mood, you have to have the right actions each day to do that.
Oh, this is really powerful. There's two key takeaways there. The mood is contagious. I've not thought of it in that way, but it's really interesting. We do have mirror neurons, and we bounce off each other all the time. And quite often it's the leader that is setting the tone. So if you're turning up every day frustrated, I could put all kinds of adjectives here, Graeme, then that's going to get contagious. If you're showing and role modeling the behaviors of self-care, that's going to get contagious. So that's a really powerful message there straight away, Graeme. Now, this 40%, you've got my attention here. I can tell you what jumps straight in my head is the difference between a victim mindset and a creator mindset. And it's often that choice is that stimulus that happened, that thing that happened to you. People use this language all the time. That thing that happened to you, that's not in your control. That's the 10% Graeme's talking about. But the 40% is in your control. How you respond, and listen to the words Graeme used, how you intentionally respond is in your control. So you can choose to have a victim mindset and go, woe is me, and, this always happens, and go negative. Or you can go, well, how am I going to respond? What can I do with what I have from where I am, and make an intentional response? How does that sit with you?
Well, it's just right, and all the evidence shows that. And I think the other thing that I consciously did, because I'm not out of the woods now, I still have, every now and again, I have some real, feel the anxiety, have early morning awakening, that sort of stuff. But my immediate action now is to do two things. One is to set an appointment with my psychiatrist, and it can often be a year since I last spoke to him, but also then share it with my wife and two other mates. And they know that about my history of what I've been through, but they also had their own issues. They had their own ups and downs, as we all have. And there's just something very powerful of being able to speak your truth and take action with a professional. And the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our life. And, investing time in those relationships is such an important thing for a leader to do. That could be a work colleague, but it could, be a private friend as well, particularly a private friend who might be in a similar role or a similar leadership position that can give a bit of perspective and add some insight there.
Yeah, really good. The power of these relationships, where it comes from. But then what I'm taking away here, Graeme, or what's bouncing in my head is that you're then there for each other.
100%, yeah.
And you're going to have seasons of ups and downs, but you're in it together, and you're going to support each other, whoever that person is. Yeah.
And the other thing is that men aren't really good at talking face to face. We're much better at doing that, especially talking about tough times. So my getting together I have rituals each week to get together with, different mates, but you're walking shoulder to shoulder, and somehow it's easier to talk and be more honest, more frank by doing that. And you're also getting good exercise as well. So it's a win-win.
Oh, I like this. This is a big tip. I've got to say, a lot of people would have said what they might have defaulted to is go for a beer or go for a coffee together, but then you're facing each other and it becomes it becomes a bit real, and it becomes a bit daunting. It's always real. Daunting's the word I was looking for. I like this idea of walking shoulder to shoulder. You can, I don't know, it feels freeing, and you're also getting some physical exercise at the same time, which we know that impacts your well-being, as your mental well-being, not just your physical well-being, but it impacts your mental well-being as well. This is a good tip. So if you've been wanting to reach out to a friend, this is a mini call to action here, Graeme. If you've been wanting to reach out for a friend and do some of the things that Graeme's talking about, think about going for a walk together. This is powerful, Graeme. All right, I want to get into some other practical things. So in your book, you talk about three pillars, and these are the ones I want to unpack now. We've been talking about self-care, and we're not done with that one yet. Then we're going to talk about crew care, and then you talk about this thing called red zone care, which has really got my curiosity as well. So in this self-care, and you spoke about the moodometer before, how do you use that? How does someone use this moodometer in a daily practice? What does it mean?
I do have a moodometer action plan. It's a one-page poster, which I'd be happy to share with your audience. And basically, it's, red, amber, green. And it's guidance. If you're in the red zone, these are the 5 things you need to do to move yourself to the amber zone. If you're in the amber zone, these are the 5 things to get to the green zone. If you're in the green zone, these are the things you have to do to stay there. And, just really asking, if you think about your life now, 10 is the best you've ever been. And it's, you know that you're in great shape. You're good for the people around you as well, your family, your work colleagues, et cetera, et cetera. And then it comes down to the amber zone, and particularly around 5 is when you're feeling anxiety very regularly, but you still remember the good times. And when it comes down to the red zone and you spend some time in the red zone, you think you've always been there. You can't remember good times. And so it's a good insight to have if you've been feeling really down or depressed for a long period of time. You're not thinking straight. You really aren't. You have a very closed view of your life because you can't remember the good times before. And so the most important thing is to be able to recognize your early warning signs and take corrective action. And people have different early warning signs. For me, it's early morning awakening, not being able to get back to sleep. It's, feeling a sense of anxiety a lot of the time, basically. And each week, I look at the last week. I have a 1 week planner, and I consider about, I love there's the famous American poet Maya Angelou, and she says success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. Such a simple thing, but it really does encapsulates what's important to you. So it's not what other people's definition of success is. Do I like myself? Do I like what I do? Again, that's a bit of the purpose stuff. And then how I'm doing it. And so thinking about that helps you also to think about the moodometer. Those 3 questions can help to add a bit of flesh to it. And then based on that, you plan the week ahead.
Okay, so 2 major things I'm taking here. I like the Maya Angelou stuff. So do I like myself? I'm going to convert that in. Am I proud of myself? Am I proud of myself? Do I like what I'm doing? That's the purpose, and that it's got some kind of meaning. And do I like how I'm doing it? What I'm taking away from that, Graeme, is a little bit of a check-in to go, are my behaviors congruent with my values? And if I'm slipping into a trap of starting to do some behaviors that I wouldn't be proud of, that are incongruent with my values, I start kind of, I know something never feels right when you're doing something that's incongruent with your values. Do I like how I'm doing it? Then on the moodometer, the thing that struck me, Graeme, was the early warning signs. And I started playing out, examples that I've seen in my life of a high-flying individual that was seemingly on the outside was soaring, was brilliant, and then absolutely crashed. The burnout was fall off a cliff burnout kind of thing, and really capitulated at that point. And what you got me thinking is, I wonder what the early signs would have been. So if they had have been noticing and naming, I haven't been sleeping well lately, like you said, I'm waking up with these troubles in the morning, or I'm struggling to get to sleep at night. Whatever it is for you, I guess you need to notice and name your own baseline mood and your baseline behavior. And when things that are out of character start to creep in, to notice them early when you're in the amber zone before you get to the red zone. Is that the right thing? And then take action early, not wait until you fall off the cliff. Take action.
Yeah. The Amazons, you can move up relatively quickly back to the green zone. In the red zone, it can be very long and very protracted. So I had in my previous book, Back from the Brink, I interviewed a guy who was the director of public affairs for Google based in Washington, a guy called Bob Borstein. And he'd lived with bipolar all his life. But he said, and it's another way of thinking about it, you need to be your own therapist. And that didn't mean that you didn't seek professional help at all. What he meant was you need to be able to recognize your early triggers and then take appropriate action.
Yeah, really good, Graham. This is a powerful takeaway. I want to just, as a segue towards, I want to go to crew care now, but just a final one on self-care. And I'm encouraging people to go and get the book and read this yourself. But the other things to look at is what we're talking about here is all of the elements of well-being. So psychological well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being, career well-being, having your finger on the pulse, notice and name where you're at on all of these areas. Okay, so I think we've covered this enough for now, Graham, although I feel like we could talk about it for 27 hours, the importance of self-care. The leader then needs to shift it onto your second pillar, which is crew care. How do we shift then our mind from self-care to crew care, and what does that mean?
I think it's about wanting to create a great environment, a great team dynamic. And, I often ask people to think about a great team they've been part of, as part of Are You OK? And helped to grow it from just an idea to what it's become today. And that, when I think about that, I think about the critical success factors was a great vision, which was a conversation could change a life. And that was a brilliant tagline by Gavin Larkin. But, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. What was the question you asked? Sorry, can I go back to that?
I'll just prompt you and say, yeah, what does it feel like when you're in one of those exhilarating teams where everything is working? Remember what that feels like. So back to you.
Yeah, I've asked people in my keynotes and workshops to think of a great team they've been part of. It could have been, the current role, previous role, when they were in a sports team or when they worked at McDonald's. And what made that difference? And I have them discuss it in, 2, 3s, or 4s. And you see the energy rise in the room as they recall these teams and talk to each other about that. And then if it's a large audience, I ask them then to think about, if they had to think of a few things that were core to it, what was it? And then do a live anonymous poll, with Menti. And there's like 10 qualities there, like, compelling vision, complementary strengths, et cetera, et cetera. But in 95% of the cases, the top 3 are we cared about each other, we had each other's back, and we encouraged each other. And these are all very human things, aren't they? They're about a human dynamic that is good, positive, and productive.
Yeah, really good. So the elements I'm coming up with there are, you're coming together around some kind of shared purpose. That vision is pulling you all in a common direction, and it's one that's meaningful. But just this, we're in it together and we got each other's back. And if I can, I'm gonna talk about what is the opposite. We hear about, toxic workplaces. And what do toxic workplaces look like? The exact opposite of everything you just said, where everyone feels like, I don't trust this person. They're out to stab me in the back. They're undermining me. They're doing all of this. But the ones that you remember that that was an awesome experience. Everyone felt like they had each other's back. I think that's it, Graham. I think you've nailed it here. So as a leader, what do we do with that?
Yeah, well, there's 3 components which I talk about in the book. And the first is that belonging is about caring. And belonging is so important. And helping people to feel connected with their colleagues can make a massive difference. And I can just use a sporting analogy or a sporting story. In Melbourne, there's a very successful team called the Richmond Tigers. But in 2016, they just went horribly in the competition. And I think they came 3rd or 4th last. And so the coach, Damien Hardwick, was really devastated. And, he'd had previous success as a player and a coach. But at the end of that year, he was micromanaging. He hated the players, hated it. And he went over to the US. His father said, well, this doesn't define you. Go and have an explore. And he met a coach over there that told him about the three H's. And the three H's are our life highlights, hardships, and heroes. And Damien came back, and in the first meeting with the entire team, he shared his three H's and, highlights. He previous won a premiership and, when his kids were born and, talked about three of those things. His hardship was last year, the one that he could really remember, and how it made him feel and how it made them feel. And then he talked about his hero. And in that case, it was his father, who told him, this doesn't define you. Reset, come back and see how you're going. Now, in that player and coach and support team, there was 45 people. And each of those people had a chance to talk about their three H's. And some of them were really embarrassing, a few had grown up in housing commission homes and talked about being embarrassed to invite friends home. But it created this incredible trust and support and psychological safety. And literally in 1 year, they won the premiership from being absolutely devastated the year before. So what that was about was just creating incredible connection and trust. It was also about creating the second tier, which is leading with psychological safety, where you make it safe for people to be themselves. You make it safe for people to make suggestions. You make it safe for people to challenge an idea they don't agree with. And then the third element is growing together, encouraging each other to take intelligent risks to better serve their customers or their colleagues. And if it doesn't work out, reset quickly, learn what we learned from this, and let's go again. And the right team helps to make that happen. And a leader contributes 70% of that, according to Gallup, to that engagement and well-being of the team. But everyone can play a role in helping to make that happen.
Yeah, really good, Graeme. So 3 pillars here. So this need for belonging, the need for psychological safety, and this want to grow together. So the belonging, wanting to feel like we belong to something bigger than ourselves that's important and that other people have got our back, they care about me. The psychological safety, the ability to speak up without the fear of judgment, and I can say what's on my mind in a respectful way, and then growing together. And the thread that I was pulling there, Graeme, is that I was picking from you was the rituals of sharing. The rituals of sharing. That if you have these rituals where you can have these conversations about, what are your highlights? What are your hardships? Who are your heroes? That it makes it very human. That people are sharing openly their story. And in those stories, everyone would be sitting there going, oh, you're a bit more similar to me than I thought you were. And you find those things that you can bond over, that you can connect over. Oh, I didn't know that you grew up in housing commission. So did I. Or, whatever those points of connection are. And it feels like it makes it human. And if you have those rituals on the openly sharing about each other, all of a sudden it's very hard, very easy to have the psychologically safe, challenging conversations. The conversation that you might have been avoiding that everyone needs to talk about, but now you feel like you're in a safe environment where you can have that conversation. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, you've summed it up really well. And I think it just creates a strong bond. And, we're all always stronger together than trying to sort it out ourselves. But you need to have the dynamic to help to make that happen. And there was another example, of that journey for Richmond. And there was a young player, 21 years old, he had his 21st birthday and he invited all the people, but he lived in Bendigo, which is, an hour and a half or whatever from Melbourne. And so I thought, oh, 4 or 5 of my good mates have come along. Every person in the playing group and the coach support group went to that birthday. And, just incredible trust grew over that year. And, many people have had that in a team they've been in, but, the challenge is to then, how can you help to make it happen again? What are the steps you can do to make a difference?
Yeah, really good. All right. And we're in it together for each other. Really good. All right. So let's take us to the third pillar. We need to talk about this as well. So you talk about red zone care. So we've talked about self-care, crew care. In your book, you also talk about red zone care. What does that mean, and how does that show up in terms of our responsibilities as a leader?
Really comes back to the moodometer, which you've talked about before, and all 3 pillars do. Self-care is about keeping yourself in the green zone. Crew care is about keeping your team in the green zone. Red zone care is about being able to identify and best support someone who's struggling. And as you would know, Mick, there's massive challenges in the workplace today. There's the AI revolution, which is turning workplaces upside down. Middle East war is creating lots of uncertainty and changes in costs. The cost of living crisis. So there's many, many challenging people for that. Red zone care is, where you start to feel symptoms for more than 4 or 5 days in a row. And those symptoms could include anxious all the time. It could include a racing mind. It could include not being able to concentrate. It could include libido going down. And they all happen in life. But the medical care tells you if it happens sort of 6 days in a row, then you need to really think about it and take action. So we talked before about our triggers that we recognize, but, it's always good when you think you could be approaching that red zone to share it with friends and family, but also to seek professional help.
Let's talk about this professional help. This is something I specifically like about Are You OK Day, by the way, but I want to walk away with this, both for myself and for the audience, with some good tips on how to do what I'm about to say, Graeme. One of the things that we need to overcome if we're going to have these conversations with people, we're going to reach out to someone and say, are you okay, and be there for them, is we need to overcome any fear of doing so. We need to normalize that it's okay that we have these conversations, and the words, how are you, are not just a greeting, it's a question, that we're taking a genuine interest in each other, leaning into that, but knowing that I'm leaning into it, that I'm not a professional psychologist, I'm not a licensed therapist, etc. But then knowing that if I'm in a conversation with my friend and I can see, I'm going to call it the red zone signs, and I'm not a professional, at what point do I go, oh, hang on a second, I need to encourage action here for the person to go and talk to Lifeline or Beyond Blue or their EAP program in the workplace? How do we know? It's 2 things. How do we overcome the fear that, yes, you're not a psychologist and we don't expect you to be, but you need to have the conversation? And then how do you know in the conversation to go, oh, wow, this is beyond me? You need to talk to someone and encourage them to take that action, Graeme.
Yeah. And, really like to reinforce what you just said there about you're not meant to be a therapist. You're not meant to be able to provide great professional support. But emotional support is a huge benefit. It really is. And just by asking that question, listening with empathy, keeping on asking open-ended questions, the more they feel understood, the more likelihood that they will then take action when you suggest it. So in terms of just giving your readers, I guess, a guide, and I've got a poster on this, which is on the back of the moodometer poster, so I'll send that to you as well. But it's how to support a teammate in distress. And it's a acronym, I care. So the first thing is identify. And that's looking for changes, changes in mood, changes in reliability, changes in appearance, changes in punctuality, changes in life circumstances, going through divorce or financial problems. The next thing, C, is for compassion and putting yourself in their shoes and making an observation about the changes you've seen. I notice you're not coming to the pub on Thursday night like we used to. It's not like you. Are you okay? Is everything okay? And to be honest, that's more successful than asking, are you okay up front? Because the natural response is, yeah, I'm fine. But if you talk about something specific, it increases the chance it can go deeper. And, men often jump in and try to solve the problem quickly. You should do this, this, and this. But yet, as I mentioned before, getting people to speak and to share what's really going on. Like, there could be someone turning up late for work, but you probe and you find out that they're not sleeping well. You probe further and you find that, that he's got a son who's an ice addict and he's driving around town all night to try and find him. So finding out what the root cause is can really help. The next element, A, is to access experts. So this is, calling an EAP, calling a helpline, seeing a GP, doing a self-test. Both Beyond Blue and Black Dog have got self-tests for anxiety, depression, bipolar. So, getting some further insight, those self-tests can say, yeah, look, I really need to take action here. And it can be done by, ringing a helpline. There's lots of good helplines out there, Lifeline, Beyond Blue, Suicide Callback Service. Men's Line is one specifically for men and their issues. They're getting to access experts. The R is for revitalizing work. And in most situations, the science of recovery tells us that people are better off being connected with their workmates than sitting at home by themselves. There's exceptions to that. There might be a doctor that says you really need to have a week off and you have to listen to that. But in most situations, it's better to be connected with your workmates, even if it's for less time working, less hours working, or less commitments. And then the final element is the exercise. Are they going for a walk each day or swimming or cycling or whatever? And those 5 things that I just talked about can help to guide questions. So, you can ask people, if you shared it with people around that you're struggling, have you spoken to someone about it that you trust? Are you exercising? Are you enjoying work? What are, trying to really identify and suggest actions. And by listening with empathy, you might find out that the root cause is really financial distress. Husband's lost his job, we're in financial difficulties. So could then be the right action could be to go and see a financial advisor or an accountant. But yeah, there's an amazing story in the book by a guy called Bob Chapman, ran a company called Barry Waymiller in the US, grew it from 20 million to 3.6 billion. And yeah, tragically, he just died. He was 80, but amazing leader. He wrote a book called Everybody Matters, which I strongly encourage people to get. But he said he used to think caring was going to talk to people. But he discovered that it was actually listening with empathy. And he found that breakthrough so profound that they end up putting together a listening with empathy course. They designed their own. Every person went to it. It was a day course. And people not only said it transformed their workplace, it transformed their private life as well, being able to learn those skills of listening with empathy.
Yeah, really good, Graeme. So if I recap the frameworks, so I care, identify, compassion, access experts, revitalizing work, and then exercise. It's a good frame, I'm going to say, to have these conversations. But the big takeaway for me, Graeme, is you're not listening to solve their problem. Don't go into problem-solving mode. You're listening with empathy. And if I can, I want to add one and say you're listening without judgment. And you're not there to give them professional support. You're there to give them emotional support. That was the key takeaway that I took. And then the encouraging action is, once you've got a bit of a frame of understanding what's going on, that's when you can encourage action. Oh, you need to talk to a financial advisor, or you need to talk to a professional therapist or whatever the case may be. But you've given them I'm going to say a good damn listening to before you even got to that point. Yeah, really good, Graeme. All right, so I'm going to draw us to a close now. I'm going to just to summarize some really key points, Graeme, and then we'll come to our final 4 questions of the interview. So, great leaders care. That caring is not soft. It's not the opposite of performance. It's actually what creates sustainable performance. And it starts with these 3 pillars. And the first one, it starts with you. It starts with that self-care. Using this moodometer so that you understand, that you notice and name your mood and any changes in mood. And the sooner you find the early signs, the sooner you can take action. And as Graeme emphasized, if you're in the amber zone, it's much easier to get back to the green zone than if you wait until you're in the red zone. So that's the key call to action there. Moodometer, notice and name your mood and look for early signs before it becomes something much worse. The crew care then, that you're responsible for creating an area of belonging, of psychological safety, where the team knows, likes, and trusts each other, and they feel that they've got each other's back. You're responsible for that culture and creating that. And then the red zone care, when someone does get into this situation, that you're there to help them. But what you're there to help them do is to give them that emotional support, to listen to them, to listen with empathy, to listen without judgment, and then to encourage action. This has been a wonderful conversation, Graeme. Thank you so much for sharing all of these insights, and they're things that we all need to take action on. This is not a build your knowledge podcast, team. This is a listen to Graeme, and if you're self-identifying from the things that we are talking about, don't just walk away from this podcast feeling wiser. Walk away from this podcast and actually do something. Take some action either with yourself in self-care or with your team around the crew care.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Thanks, Graeme. All right. So let's go to our final 4 questions. These are the same questions we ask all of our guests. So what's the one thing that you know now, Graeme Cowan, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I think it was the importance of nurturing strong relationships with, of course, your family, but also to make sure that you develop those with friends. And there's 3 key elements of that. One is that it's a positive experience. And why would you meet with someone if it wasn't a positive experience? But it's a good way to, have a first filter. The second thing is you do it consistently, and, you have rituals that mean you catch up with people regularly. And then the third element is that you're comfortable to be vulnerable. And this is the part that is often missing from particularly male relationships. You're comfortable saying when things aren't working out, when you're having issues. That knowing that now, like since my breakdown, I've, just really deliberately built those strong relationships. And the evidence shows that the longest wellbeing's ever done, the Harvard Adult Development Study, shows that the best predictor of a long life, a happy life, a more affluent life, a longer sex life is having those strong and supportive relationships around us.
Yeah, really powerful. Thank you, Graeme. And that's a call to action for everyone as well. When was the last time the consistency was the big one for me with what you just said. I do have a really good a small but good circle of friends, but I don't think I'm consistent enough with that reach out, Graeme. Okay. What's your favorite book?
There's a lot of great business books, but one that I read quite regularly is Man's Search for Meaning. And I'm reading it at the moment, actually. I've probably read it 10 times. And for your listeners, it's a story by Viktor Frankl, who was a German psychiatrist and Jewish, and was imprisoned in Auschwitz and other concentration camps. And he was one of only 28. One in 28 survived. And he tried to look at what led to people increasing their chance of surviving. And it was having a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning in life. It could have been as simple as looking forward to seeing and getting together with your wife or kids again. It could be as simple as playing your beloved piano again. And The other really key message that's in that book, it's a short read, it's only like an afternoon, but you learn about concentration camps, you learn about insights, but probably the biggest insight that he added was that no matter what happens, you can choose how you respond. And that was something that could be never taken away from people in concentrations. You can choose how to respond to difficult as well as good circumstances.
Yeah, really good. That's so consistent with everything we've spoken about today, Graeme. Yeah, thank you. What's your favourite quote?
The Maya Angelou one, success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. I reckon it's brilliant.
Brilliant and great takeaway in today's discussion as well. And finally, Graeme, how do people find you? There's going to be people, just like I said, that are listening to this going, wow, this Graeme guy sounds like he's talking about me and my team. How do people find you? How do people find your books? And how do they take advantage of your services or your speaking, all of the above?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I share regularly there. I have a newsletter each week through that. So that's probably my most active social media. My website, of course, which is graemecowan.com.au. And, in terms of the book, it's available everywhere at the moment. It's even in airport bookstores, featured in airport bookstores. And Booktopia just made the book, Great Leaders Care, its business book of the month, which was lovely to see.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Graeme. What I want to say is two things to you. One is congrats on the success of the book, and that's wonderful. But more importantly, I just want to say thank you and to express gratitude to you on behalf of many thousands of people that you've impacted their lives of, whether it's through Are You OK Day, which has been an incredible success in getting people to have these conversations, or through your books or through sharing your story so others feel that they can also openly share their story, all the way through to your practical frameworks on what people can do about it. This work is so important, Graeme, and I just want to thank you on behalf of many thousands of people for everything that you do. Thank you. And thank you for your time today and sharing this on the show today as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mick. I really enjoyed our talk.
What an important conversation that was with Graeme Cowan. This episode reminded me that leadership is ultimately a human endeavour. Yes, results matter. Yes, performance matters. But performance becomes much harder to sustain when people are exhausted, disconnected, overwhelmed, or struggling in silence. A few key lessons really stood out for me. First, self-care comes before crew care. As Graeme said, leaders cannot pour from an empty cup. The energy, mood, and well-being of a leader inevitably ripple through the team around them. Second, caring leadership is not about lowering standards. It's about creating the conditions where people can consistently perform at their best. Third, noticing matters. Many people don't need us to solve their problems. They need us to notice that something has changed. Ask a thoughtful question and create space for a genuine conversation. And finally, leadership is often expressed through small moments. A check-in, a question, a conversation, a simple act of care. These moments can have a bigger impact than we realise. So let me leave you with a few questions to reflect on. How would your team describe your energy and mood right now? Who in your team might benefit from a conversation you've been putting off? And what could you do this week to better care for yourself so that you can better care for others? This week, I encourage you to choose one person and have a genuine check-in conversation. Not a project update, not a status meeting, a real human conversation. Ask how they're doing and then truly listen. Truly listen and give them space to express whatever it is that's going on in their life, and listen without judgment. I encourage you to inspire action. If there is something that's holding them back or something that they're struggling with, encourage them to reach out to a professional if they do need help. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Leadership Project. Next week, we're welcoming back a return guest, Hugh Thomas. In his first appearance on the show, Hugh helped us understand change at an individual level, exploring fear, identity, uncertainty, and what happens when people are asked to step into the unknown. This time, we're taking the conversation to the organisational level and managing change throughout an organisation. You've been listening to the Leadership Project. If today sparked an insight, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with one other person who would benefit from listening to the show. A huge thank you to Gerald Calabo for his tireless work editing every episode, and to my amazing wife, Say, who does all the heavy lifting in the background to make this show possible. None of this happens without them. Around here, we believe leadership is a practice, not a position, that people should feel seen, heard, valued, and that they matter, and that the best leaders trade ego for empathy, certainty for curiosity, and control for trust. If that resonates with you, please subscribe on YouTube and on your favourite podcast app. And if you want more, follow me on LinkedIn and explore our archives for conversations that move you from knowing to doing. Until next time, lead with curiosity, courage, and care.